Hi friends, this is Noemi from Jackie Bean, and today I'm going to show you how to make this cute bow using scrap yarn. It's a super simple project and perfect for beginners because all you have to know is how to do knit and purl stitches besides casting on and binding off. For this project, you are going to be needing some scrap yarn in red, white, and blue colors. I'm using Malabrigo Rios, which is a worsted weight yarn, and you can find this yarn in my shop if you're interested. I'm doing Matisse Blue, Cerisa, and Natural, and besides that I'm going to be needing my 4.5mm double pointed needles, a yarn needle, a pin for the bow, and scissors. Okay, so we are going to start with knitting the leg part, so this part of the bow, and we are going to start with the blue yarn. I switched actually my needles to my circular needles only because these are bamboo needles and I find them a little bit more sticky, and I really like that, and I couldn't find my double pointed bamboo needles, so I'm gonna be using my circular ones, but you can use your double pointed ones. And I am going to cast on 12 stitches. Okay, so I've cast on 12 stitches, and now I am going to start knitting it. So for the first 6 rows, we are going to be doing garter stitch, which is when you knit every row on both the wrong and the right side of the work. And I always knit the first stitch in my row, and the last stitch I just slip the last stitch over to my needle. I don't knit that. Now again, I'm going to be knitting every row. And the last row in the garter stitch, so it's row 6. Now you can tell that we have 6 rows of garter stitch. You have 3 purl rows on the right side of your work. And now we're going to switch to stockinette stitch. The stockinette stitch is when you knit the right side of your work and purl the wrong side of your work. So you're going to be knitting the first row. It's a 2-row repeat. So we're knitting every stitch in the first row. And then we are going to be purling the next row. And then again we are going to be knitting the first row always and purling the second row. Okay, so now that my work has reached the desired length, it is about 4 inches from the cast on, but you can do it longer too. I am going to cut the blue yarn and I'm going to start knitting with the red and a white yarn. I'm going to be creating the striped fabric. So I'm starting with the red. And we are going to keep working the stockinette stitch, so knit on the right side of the work and purl on the wrong side of the work for another about 3.5 inches or so. So it's going to be 2 rows with the red yarn and then 2 rows with the white yarn. So I knit the front side, the right side of my work, and I will purl the wrong side of my work. Okay, so we did 2 rows of the red yarn, and now we are going to be doing 2 rows of the white yarn. Okay, now that we have knitted the first 2 rows with the red yarn and then the next 2 rows with the white yarn, we are going to be repeating this pattern. So 2 rows with red, 2 with the white, until the second part of our leg reaches about the same distance as this one, about 3.5 inches. So we have knitted another about 3.5 inches or so. You can see if you fold your work in half. And it's okay if the edges are rolling up because we are going to block our project later and that will help. It's about the same length right now as the blue side before, or I should say after, the garter stitch pattern. So now we are going to cut our white yarn. We won't need that anymore. Put that away, and we are only going to be using our red yarn to create the garter stitch. So for the garter stitch, you just knit every row. So now that we are done with the 6 rows of garter stitch, so you can see the 3 purl rows showing up on the right side of the work, it's time to cast off. Okay, so next we are going to knit the bow part of the bow. So for this, we're going to start with the blue yarn again, and we are going to cast on 12 stitches. On 12 stitches, and we are going to knit this whole piece in stockinette, which is knitting the right side and purling the wrong side. Now that our piece has reached about 6 inches or so, we are going to cut the blue yarn and we are going to start knitting the red and white part. And just like when we knitted the leg part, we are starting with the red yarn and we will knit 2 rows of stockinette with red, and then we switch to white and 2 rows with that. Now that the stripe part of our fabric reached about the same length as the blue part of the fabric, you can see if you fold them in half that they are about the same. Then we can cut our red yarn and we are going to cast off using the white yarn. Now we can cut the white yarn as well. And we are done with the second piece. Again, it's okay if the edges are curling up because we are going to be blocking this project as well. The last piece, I'm going to be using the red yarn, but you can use either color that you want. I'm going to cast on 5 stitches. And I'm going to work these 5 stitches in stockinette stitch. So I'm going to be knitting the right side and purling the wrong side. Now that my piece has reached about 2.5 inches, a little over 2.5 inches, I'm going to cast off. Okay, so we have all 3 pieces knitted, the little piece for the middle, this strip for the bow, and this one for the legs of the bow. Next, we can start weaving in ends. With the tiny piece, I'm actually not going to weave in the ends because I'm going to be using these 2 tail ends to sew this piece onto the bow. Honestly, it doesn't really matter how you weave these ends in because they are going to be in the inside of the bow, so you won't see them anyways. All the ends are weaved in and it is time to steam block them. See the difference between a blocked and an unblocked project? Now that we have all 3 pieces blocked, it's time to assemble the bow. So first, I need a little piece of scrap yarn and my yarn needle. and I'm going to start with the leg part of the bow, and all I'm going to do is kind of like crunch it up a little bit where the color change is and fold it in the shape of a V. And now just with a few stitches I'm going to secure this. You can kind of play around with this part to see how you like it. So again, I'm just doing kind of like a few random stitches. And now that it's kind of in a shape of an upside down V, I'm going to turn it on the back, and I'm going to tie a knot. I'll put that on the side. Next, I am going to be assembling the bow part. So for the bow, I'm going to start it on the back, and I'm going to stitch these two pieces together. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect because you actually will not be able to see this part of the bow. And I could have just left the long tail after casting off and not cut it, and I could have just used that to stitch these two pieces together, but you can do it with scrap yarn as well. And I'm going to just with a few stitches, kind of like up and down. I'm doing large stitches. Going to stitch the back to the front. Now pull on it. It's a shape of a bow. You can do a few more stitches, or I like to just twist my yarn around it a couple times. I'll do one more stitch. So come from behind, go back down, right, and now I am going to tie this yarn as well. I did a triple knot. Okay, we're done with the scrap yarn for now. So we have the bow, the legs, and this middle piece. This is the right side of the work, but I actually kind of like the wrong side of the work. And I'm going to thread my yarn needle. I'm going to take the bow, just wrap this tiny piece around the middle of the bow. With a few stitches. I'll do some with the other one too. I'm going to sew it together. Okay, so I just did 2 stitches. Now I'm going to tie a triple knot. And I'm going to pull the tail end of my yarn to the inside of the bow before I cut it. And all we have left is to sew the leg part of the bow on. Again, I need one more piece of scrap yarn for this. And now you can decide if you would like to stitch your bow together like this, or if you want to flip it and you want to have the stripe on one side and the blue on the other side. I kind of prefer it this way, but it is completely personal preference. So now I'm going to flip my work back side, and just with a few stitches I'm going to sew it on. Again, I'm going to tie a knot. Pull the ends in using my yarn needle. And now we can put this little bow in here. And if you wanted to, when you are stitching on this middle part, you could have just sewed in a hair tie, but my girls like to use the little clippy bows, the alligator clips. So that's what I did. And now if you want to, you could do a little star shape or write USA here. On this bow, I did a little star, and this one doesn't have anything on it. But I think on this one, I am going to do a little star. So for the star, I'm going to need a piece of white scrap yarn. When I was creating this star, I didn't really draw it out. I kind of just guessed it. So that's what I'm going to do now. Here it's important to make sure that you're not pulling your stitches too tight, otherwise you're going to cause a little bit of puckering in the fabric. Okay, so there's a little star. And I'm going to tie these yarns together. Again, making sure not to pull it too tight. And our bow is all done. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And if you liked the video or found it helpful, please like and subscribe. You can find the yarn I used on my website at JackieBean.com. Thanks for watching!